What is the true nature of revenge? Is it a single, fiery act of passion? A blind strike in the heat of the moment? Or is it something else entirely? Something colder, more patient, a work of art, crafted with chilling precision from the raw materials of grief and fury. A systematic, multi-part masterpiece of retribution, so complete and so terrible that it becomes a legend. I want you to imagine, for a moment, that you are a queen, your husband, the king, the center of your world, and the father of your infant son, has been brutally murdered. He was ambushed, captured, and torn apart by a rival tribe. Your kingdom is vulnerable. Your son is too young to rule. And now, the very men who killed your husband have the breathtaking audacity to approach you. They do not come with apologies or offers of tribute. They come with a marriage proposal, demanding you marry their prince, the man who orchestrated your husband's death. They have not just killed your king. They are trying to swallow your kingdom and erase your legacy. They see you as a weak, grieving woman, a political prize to be claimed. They have made a profound mistake. Tonight, we journey into the heart of the 10th century Kievan Rus, a land of dense forests, wide rivers, and brutal tribal politics. We are here to uncover the story of perhaps the most brutal, calculated, and terrifyingly systematic act of vengeance in all of medieval history, orchestrated by a single woman who would go on to become a saint. This is the story of Olga of Kyiv. Number 1. The First Revenge, an honor fit for an ambassador. The delegation of Drevlian ambassadors arrived at the gates of Kyiv full of confidence. They were 20 of their finest and most influential men, sent by their Prince Mal to secure the hand of the recently widowed Olga. Their proposal was an insult, wrapped in a demand that she should discard her dead husband and willingly marry the man who had ordered his murder. In their minds, her acquiescence was a foregone conclusion. Olga, however, met them not with tears, but with a strange and unsettling grace. According to the ancient chronicles, she spoke to them with a calm, almost sweet, demeanor. "Your proposal is pleasing to me," she said. "Indeed, my husband cannot rise from the dead, but I desire to honor you tomorrow in the presence of my people." She told them to remain in their boat overnight, and that in the morning, her people would come and carry them, boat and all, into the city as a sign of supreme honor. The Drevlians, flattered by this promise and blinded by their own arrogance, readily agreed. That night, Olga gave a different set of orders. She commanded her people to dig a deep, wide trench within the palace court. The next morning, as promised, the people of Kyiv approached the Drevlian boat. They hoisted the vessel onto their shoulders, with the 20 proud ambassadors sitting inside, and carried them into the city. But they did not take them to the palace hall. They marched directly to the trench, and with a great heave, threw the entire boat and the men within it into the pit. As the ambassadors struggled in shock and confusion, Olga leaned over the edge and asked them, with chilling serenity, "Does this honor suit your taste?" She then ordered her people to bury them alive. Number 2. The Second Revenge, the cleansing fire. One act of revenge was not enough to quench her rage. This was merely the opening movement of her symphony of destruction. Playing the part of the dutiful potential bride, Olga sent a message back to the Drevlians before the news of the first delegation's fate could reach them. She agreed to the marriage, she said, but only if they sent their most distinguished men to Kyiv to escort her back to their lands with the honor befitting a future queen. The Drevlians, still unaware of the fate of their first ambassadors, were delighted. They gathered a party of their best and most powerful chieftains, the very men who governed their lands and led their armies, and dispatched them to Kyiv. When they arrived, Olga greeted them with the same feigned hospitality. "You must be weary from your journey," she said. "Go now, and cleanse yourselves in my bathhouse, and then you may come before me." The chieftains, eager to present themselves clean and refreshed to their new queen, entered the large, wooden bathhouse. As soon as they were inside, Olga's soldiers bolted the doors from the outside, trapping them. She then gave a simple command: set it ablaze. The chroniclers report that the Drevlian nobles were burned to death, their screams silenced by the roar of the consuming fire. Number 3. The third revenge. A thirsty funeral feast. Her vengeance was still not satisfied. The men who had proposed the insulting marriage were dead, but the people who had murdered her husband still lived. Now, it was time to take the revenge to her enemy's own lands. She sent another message to the Drevlians, a message of haunting piety. I am now coming to you, theirs and to Devlians, and to so a, ours, and no, this. It was time to take the revenge. The rotno, to drotnai, it said. So prepare great quantities of mead in the city where you killed my husband, that I may weep over his grave and hold a funeral feast for him. The Drevlians, now having lost 2 delegations of their best men but still clinging to the hope of a union, did as she commanded. Olga, with a small retinue of soldiers, travelled to Scorched, the Drevlian capital, to the very spot where her husband, Igor, had been tied to 2 bent trees and torn in half. She wept at his burial mound, performing the traditional rites of a grieving widow. Then, the feast began. She encouraged the Drevlians to drink. When they asked where their escorts were, the 2 delegations they had sent, she told them they were following with her retinue. She urged the Drevlians to drink deeply, to drown their suspicions and mourn their dead prince's victim with her. They obliged. The mead flowed freely, and soon the Drevlian soldiers and chieftains were hopelessly drunk, incapacitated by their own feast. When she saw that they were overcome, Olga's demeanor of grief vanished. She gave a signal to her own soldiers, who had remained sober. They fell upon the drunken Drevlians, and the funeral feast became a massacre. The chronicles state that 5,000 Drevlians were cut down that day before Olga and her soldiers returned to Kyiv. Number 4. The fourth revenge, the tribute of birds. But the capital city, Scorched, still stood. Olga returned the next year with a full army and laid siege to the city. The remaining Drevlians, terrified and leaderless, fought back with the courage of desperation. For a full year they held out against her army. Seeing that the siege was costly and long, Olga once again deployed her most powerful weapon, cunning deception. She sent a message to the besieged city, offering a startlingly merciful peace. "Why do you persist in holding out?" she asked. "All your other towns have surrendered to me, but you would rather starve than submit." She told them her vengeance was complete. "I will not avenge myself any longer," she said. "I desire only to take a small tribute from you and return to my home." When the Drevlians asked what she wanted, she made a bizarre request. "Give me 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house," she commanded. "I do not desire a heavy tribute like my husband did." The people of Scorched were overjoyed. This tribute was strange, but it was practically nothing. They eagerly gathered the birds from their homes and presented them to Olga as a sign of their submission. They believed the long nightmare was finally over. That evening, Olga gave her final, terrible order. She instructed her soldiers to take each bird and attach to its leg a small piece of cloth bound with sulfur. As dusk fell, the cloths were set on fire, and the birds were released. The pigeons and sparrows, as birds do, flew directly home. They flew to their nests in the dovecotes, under the eaves, and in the thatched roofs of the wooden houses and barns of Scorched. Within moments, the entire city was on fire. It was a single, inescapable inferno. As the terrified citizens fled the burning city, Olga's soldiers were waiting. They captured the leaders, killed many of the inhabitants, and sold the rest into slavery. She had not just defeated her enemies, she had erased them, using their own homes as the instruments of their destruction. It was the final, ingenious, and utterly brutal act in her masterpiece of revenge. And so, the story of Olga of Kyiv concludessa chilling testament to the fusion of personal grief and political necessity, a masterclass in vengeance that secured a kingdom for her son and carved her name into the annals of history. But Olga's tale, while extraordinary in its cunning and scope, was not an anomaly. It was an echo of a brutal truth of the medieval world, that justice was often not a function of distant law, but of immediate, personal will, and that for the powerful and the wronged, vengeance could be seen as a duty, a right, and a terrifying art form. Her story of cold, calculated fury finds its shadow in other dark corners of the age, proving that the line between honor and atrocity was often drawn with the blade of a sword. Let us travel from the forests of the Russes to the newfound shores at the edge of the world, and then to the sun-drenched coasts of the Mediterranean, to witness two more tales of epic and brutal revenge. Number 5. The Axe in the New World. Imagine you have reached a new world. After a perilous voyage across the ice-strewn North Atlantic, you have landed in Vinland, a paradise of endless forests, wild grapes, and rich pastures at the very edge of the known map. It is a chance for unimaginable wealth and a legendary reputation. But this new world has no laws but those you bring with you. It is a crucible, a place where fortunes can be made, but also a place where human nature, free from the constraints of society, can curdle into its darkest forms. On one such expedition, two Icelandic brothers, Helgi and Finnbogi, agree to a partnership with a formidable woman. She is the daughter of a legendary explorer, possessed of the same fierce ambition. The agreement is simple. They will lead two ships, with an equal number of men, to Vinland for the winter, and all profits from the timber and furs they gather will be split exactly in half. But when they arrive, the woman breaks the first rule, taking over the better houses the brothers had built on a previous journey. A tense and uneasy winter passes, the two camps living separately, their partnership frayed by suspicion. As spring approaches, the woman puts a chilling plan into motion. She secretly visits the brothers' camp and then returns to her own husband, Torvald, in tears. She weaves a false tale of humiliation, claiming the brothers had struck her and shamed her, demanding she come to them. She turns to her husband, her voice laced with poison, and delivers an ultimatum. Either he avenges her honor by slaughtering the brothers and their men, or she will divorce him and shame him for his cowardice. Tormented and manipulated, her husband agrees. At dawn, Torvald and his men launch a surprise attack on the sleeping camp, binding and executing every man present. But when they return, their task complete, the woman notes that they have left the 5 women of the other camp unharmed. Her husband's men refuse to kill them. Her face hardening with contempt at their weakness, she says, "Give me an axe." And as the men watch in horror, she personally, methodically, hacks the 5 defenseless women to death. This was the brutal, intimate vengeance of Freydis Eriksdottir, the daughter of Eric the Red. Number 6. The Bells of Palermo. But revenge is not always the calculated work of a single vengeful individual. Sometimes it is a single spark that ignites the dry tinder of a whole people's resentment, an act of private vengeance that becomes a tidal wave of collective fury. Imagine a city, the magnificent port of Palermo in Sicily, simmering with hatred under the heel of a foreign occupier. For 16 years, the people of Sicily have endured the rule of the French king, Charles of Anjou. They have suffered his heavy taxes, the confiscation of their lands, and the daily arrogance and casual brutality of the French soldiers who patrol their streets as if they own them. It is Easter Monday, 1282. The sun is beginning to set, and the people of Palermo are gathered outside the Church of the Holy Spirit to attend the evening prayer service, the Vespers. The atmosphere is festive, but the tension is always there, just beneath the surface. A French sergeant named Drouet, full of drink and authority, approaches a young, married Sicilian noblewoman. On the pretext of searching for a hidden weapon, he harasses her, laying his hands upon her. Her husband, his honor, and his wife's being violated in front of his entire community, is overcome with a sudden rage. He draws a dagger and with a single swift motion stabs and kills the French sergeant on the spot. What happened next was an explosion. The sight of the hated French uniform lying in the dust was the only signal needed. The crowd, their years of pent-up fury suddenly unleashed, turned on the other French soldiers present, slaughtering them with daggers and stones. The cry of "Death to the French" echoed through the square. Then, the church bells began to ring for Vespers. But that night, the bells were not a call to prayer. They were a call to arms. The sound spread from church to church, city to city, across the entire island of Sicily. It was the signal for a massive, popular uprising that saw the Sicilian people systematically hunt down and kill every French man, woman, and child they could find, resulting in the massacre of thousands and the permanent expulsion of the French from their island. This event, sparked by a single insult and a single act of revenge, is known to history as the Sicilian Vespers. Number 7. The Conqueror's Fury. But vengeance need not be the work of a single wronged woman or a unified, oppressed people. Sometimes, the most terrible and far-reaching revenge is an act of cold, calculated state policy, inflicted by a king upon his own subjects. It is a vengeance born not of passion, but of political necessity, designed not just to punish the guilty, but to terrorize the innocent into a state of permanent, fearful submission. Imagine you are a conqueror. You have crossed the sea, won the decisive battle, killed the enemy king, and claimed a throne that you believe is yours by right. But the country you now rule is a cauldron of resentment and defiance. For years, you are plagued by rebellion, particularly from the proud, unruly, and independent-minded people of the northern shires. They ally with your foreign enemies, they slaughter your garrisons, and they refuse to accept you as their king. How do you finally break their spirit? How do you ensure they will never, ever rise against you again? You decide that defeating their armies is not enough. You must destroy their entire world. This was the situation facing William the Conqueror in the winter of 1069. 3 years after his victory at the Battle of Hastings, his grip on the English throne was still precarious. The north of England, centered on the great city of York, had become a hotbed of rebellion, aided by Danish Viking fleets sailing up the Humber, after Norman garrisons were massacred, and his authority was openly defied for the final time. William's patience snapped. He marched his army north not just for a battle, but for a reckoning. What followed was not warfare. It was a campaign of systematic destruction, so brutal it shocked even the Norman chroniclers who wrote about it. This was the harrying, or devastation, of the north. From the River Humber to the River Tees, William's armies fanned out with simple, terrifying orders to destroy everything. They burned villages, towns, and farmsteads to the ground. They slaughtered livestock. Crucially, they burned all the stored grain and seed, destroying not just the current food supply, but the ability to grow food for the next year. It was a deliberately engineered famine. The contemporary chronicler, Orderic Vitalis, a man of Norman birth, wrote with horror of the consequences. Nowhere else had William shown so much cruelty. He made no effort to control his fury, punishing the innocent with the guilty. In his anger, he commanded that all crops and herds, chattels and food of every kind should be brought together and burned to ashes with consuming fire, so that the whole region north of the Humber might be stripped of all means of sustenance. The aftermath was apocalyptic. In the years that followed, the region was stalked by mass starvation and even reports of cannibalism. Over 100,000 people are thought to have perished. The landscape was left so barren and depopulated that decades later, the Domesday Book, William's great survey of his kingdom, would still record vast swathes of the north simply as waste. This campaign of methodical destruction, one of the most brutal acts ever committed by a monarch against his subjects, is known to history as the harrying of the north. Number 8. The Sea of Blind Men. What is the ultimate purpose of a victory in battle? Is it merely to defeat the enemy's army on the day, or is it something more profound? Is it to annihilate their will, to crush their spirits so completely that they can never rise against you again. Imagine a war that has raged for decades, a bloody, grinding stalemate between two implacable enemies in a landscape of treacherous mountain passes. Imagine you are the emperor, and you have finally, after a lifetime of struggle, achieved a total, crushing victory, capturing the entire enemy army in a single, brilliant stroke. How do you ensure this war is the very last one? You decide that killing them is too simple. You must send them home, transformed into a living message of absolute terror. This was the cold calculation made by the Byzantine Emperor, Basil II, in the year 1014. For nearly 40 years, the Byzantine Empire, the inheritors of ancient Rome, had been locked in a brutal war with the formidable Bulgarian Empire under its charismatic and effective Tsar, Samuel. Basil was a hard, ascetic soldier emperor, a man who had spent his entire adult life on campaign, driven by a single, obsessive goal: to finally destroy the Bulgarian threat to his northern borders. In the summer of 1014, at a narrow mountain pass called Kyiv, Tsar Samuel laid a trap, building a thick wooden palisade to block the Byzantine advance. For weeks, Basil's army threw itself against the fortification to no avail, but Basil was a patient and cunning strategist. He dispatched one of his best generals on a perilous flanking maneuver through the mountains. The general's forces fell upon the Bulgarians from the rear, shattering their lines. The Bulgarian army was surrounded, and in the ensuing slaughter, nearly 15,000 soldiers were taken prisoner. The fighting heart of the Bulgarian Empire was now in Basil's hands. He could have ransomed them, or sold them into slavery, or simply executed them. He chose a different path. He chose a revenge of breathtaking cruelty, designed not just to eliminate an army, but to psychologically destroy a nation. Basil gave a horrific order. He commanded that the 15,000 prisoners be blinded. They were divided into groups of 100. In each group, 99 men were blinded in both eyes. The 100th man was left with a single eye, so that he could lead his wretched, stumbling comrades home. Imagine the spectacle. A vast, shuffling column of men, a sea of 15,000 blind soldiers, stumbling through the mountains back towards their homeland. A living, breathing monument to the emperor's fury. When Tsar Samuel saw what was left of his proud army return in this state, the shock and grief were so immense that he suffered a massive stroke. He died 2 days later. The Bulgarian Empire never recovered and soon collapsed entirely. This single, devastating act of calculated terror earned the Byzantine Emperor his immortal and chilling title. Basil II, the Bulgaroktonos, the Bulgar Slayer. Number 9. The Vendetta of the Princes. Revenge, as we have seen, can be a tool of state policy, a form of psychological warfare, or a sudden, popular explosion of fury. But sometimes it is something far more intimate and treacherous. It is a poison that seeps into the very heart of a royal family, a vendetta between two princes of the blood that can tear a kingdom apart from the inside, even as foreign enemies are storming the gates. Imagine a kingdom already weakened, locked in a generation spanning war with a powerful enemy. Now, imagine its king, the symbol of its unity and strength, is slowly losing his mind to madness. He suffers from delusions, believing he is made of glass and will shatter at the slightest touch. Power becomes a vacuum, and two men, cousins of royal blood, are locked in a bitter, personal struggle to fill it. One is the king's brother, charismatic, cultured, and flamboyant, but also seen as arrogant and corrupt. The other is the king's cousina, powerful, calculating, and populist duke, who styles himself as a reformer and a man of the people. This is not a rivalry that can end in compromise. It can only end in blood. This was the state of France in the early 15th century. The nation was deep in the struggle of the 100 Years' War against England. The French king, Charles VI, was plagued by bouts of insanity. The two men vying for control were his younger brother, Louis, Duke of Orléans, and his powerful cousin, John the Fearless, Duke of Burgundy. Their political rivalry was bitter, personal, and it paralyzed the French court. After years of trading insults and bringing the kingdom to the brink of open conflict, they were finally persuaded to swear a dramatic, public oath of reconciliation, sharing communion, and promising eternal brotherhood. Just 3 days later, on the night of November 23, 1407, Louis of Orléans was leaving a visit with the Queen. He was traveling through a dark, narrow Parisian street, the Rue Vieille du Temple, accompanied by only a handful of servants. Suddenly, a gang of up to 15 masked assassins leaped from the shadows of a rented house, shouting, "To the death! To the death!" They pulled the Duke from his mule, surrounded him, and brutally hacked him to death with swords and axes, cutting off the hand that held the reins and leaving his mutilated body in the gutter. Paris was in shock. The Duke of Burgundy, John the Fearless, at first played the part of the grieving kinsman, weeping alongside the royal family. But when the city's provost tracked the assassins back to the house they had rented, he discovered it belonged to a close associate of the Duke. The net was closing. Then, in a stunning and audacious move, John the Fearless confessed to having orchestrated the entire assassination. He did not ask for forgiveness. He claimed it was a justifiable and patriotic act of tyrannicide, necessary to save France from Louis's corruption. This single act of brutal, dynastic revenge did not save the kingdom. It plunged it into a devastating civil war between the factions of the Armagnacs, Orléans supporters, and the Burgundians, a bloody conflict that would rage for 30 years and allow the English, under King Henry V, to conquer half of France. This was the vendetta that began with the murder of Louis of Orléans. Number 10. The vengeance of the monk. What is the ultimate end of a warrior's life? In the heat of battle, driven by duty and the desperate need for survival, a warrior kills his enemies. It is the fundamental, brutal calculus of his profession. But what happens when an act of battlefield vengeance, a moment of victory, leaves not a feeling of triumph, but a spiritual wound, so deep it can never be healed? What happens when the only way to avenge a death is to dedicate your own life to the soul of the man you killed? We travel now to late 12th century Japan, to the height of the Genpei War, a sweeping and bitter civil war between the Taira and Minamoto clans for control of the nation. Imagine a chaotic battle unfolding on a narrow beach at Ichi-no-Tani. The Taira clan is in full retreat, fleeing to their ships in the bay. A veteran Minamoto warrior, a samurai of immense reputation and experience named Kumagai Naozane, is scanning the battlefield for a worthy opponent. He spots a lone young warrior, magnificently dressed in fine silk armor, riding his horse into the waves to reach the fleeing ships. Kumagai taunts the young warrior, calling him a coward for showing his back to an enemy. The youth, bound by his code of honor, turns his horse back to the beach to face the challenge. They fight a desperate duel on the shoreline, and the older, more experienced samurai prevails, knocking the young warrior from his horse and pinning him down. As Kumagai tears off the young man's helmet to deliver the final blow, he is stunned by what he sees. Beneath the helmet is the face of a boy, no older than his own son, perhaps 16 years old, with the delicate features of a high-born court noble. For a moment, Kumagai hesitates. He sees his own son in the face of his enemy and wishes to spare him. But just then, his fellow Minamoto samurai are arriving. To spare the boy now would be seen as an act of treason, a betrayal of his clan. With tears in his eyes, he knows what his duty as a warrior demands. He promises the boy that he will pray for his soul, and then he takes his head. Afterwards, searching the boy's body for identification, he finds nothing but a small, beautifully crafted flute in a silk bag. He realizes that this noble youth was one of the courtiers who had been playing music within the Taira camp just before the battle began. The thought that he has just killed a cultured boy of such high birth, who had the same love for beauty as his own son, breaks something inside the veteran warrior. The victory brought him no honor, only a profound sense of sorrow and revulsion for his life's work. The act of battlefield vengeance, demanded by his code, had revealed the ultimate emptiness of that very code. Haunted by the face of the young warrior and the sound of his flute, Kumagai Naozan made a vow. He renounced his life as a samurai, abandoned his titles and his victories, and became a Buddhist monk, taking the name Rensho. He spent the rest of his life wandering the country, praying not for his own salvation, but for the soul of the young Taira prince he had killed on the beach. This was the lifelong act of penance that followed the death of Atsumori. Number 11. The Last Grand Master's Curse. Revenge, as we have seen, can be swift and brutal, or it can be a slow, creeping poison. But what is the most profound vengeance of all? Perhaps it is one that cannot be enacted by the living, a curse delivered by a man in his final, agonizing moments, a summons to a higher court from which there is no appeal. It is a revenge that unfolds not over days or weeks, but over the course of a year, felling the most powerful men in Christendom one by one, as if by an otherworldly decree. Imagine you are the Grand Master of the most powerful military order in the world. For 2 centuries, your brotherhood of warrior monks has been the tip of the spear for Christendom, the guardians of pilgrims, and the pioneers of international finance. Your order, the Knights Templar, is immensely wealthy and answers only to the Pope. But your power has made you arrogant, and your wealth has made you a target. The most powerful king in Europe, Philip IV of France, is deeply in your debt and covets your riches. He decides to destroy you. On Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, this king enacts a secret, devastating plan. In a coordinated dawn raid across all of France, you and thousands of your brother knights are arrested on charges of heresy, blasphemy, and unspeakable acts. You are thrown into dungeons and subjected to years of horrific torture by the king's inquisitors. They break your body and your spirit, forcing you and many of your knights to make false confessions to crimes you did not commit. Your order is dissolved, your wealth is seized, and your reputation is destroyed. After 7 long years in prison, it is time for the final act. On the 18th of March, 1314, you are brought to a small island in the River Seine in Paris, in the shadow of the Cathedral of Notre Dame. You are to be made an example of, to be publicly burned at the stake as a relapsed heretic. As the flames lick at your feet, you know you have nothing left to lose. In a final, powerful act of defiance, you find your voice. You recant your forced confession, proclaiming your innocence and the purity of the Templar order to the stunned crowd. And then, from amidst the fire, you deliver your terrible curse. You summon your betrayers King Philip and Pope Clement V, who had buckled to the king's pressure to meet you before the judgment of God within the year. The Pope, Clement V, died just 1 month later from a sudden illness. King Philip IV, the Fair, died before the year was out, suffering a stroke during a hunting trip. Within 14 years, all 3 of Philip's sons and successors had also died without producing a male heir, bringing the 300-year-old dynasty of the House of Capet to a stunning and definitive end. This was the legendary curse and the ultimate revenge of Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. Number 12. The Douglas Larder. Imagine you are a young English soldier in the service of King Edward I, sent north to the cold, damp, and hostile lands of Scotland. The year is 1307. You are part of an occupying army, tasked with holding a remote but strategically vital castle against an enemy that seems to be everywhere and nowhere at once. The Scottish king, Robert the Bruce, is a fugitive, but his cause is kept alive by his most feared commander, a man whose name is used by the English to frighten their own children. He is Sir James Douglas, a master of guerrilla warfare, a tireless and ruthless opponent whose ancestral home, Douglas Castle, you now occupy. He is driven by a cold, personal fury to reclaim his lands, and he seeks not just to defeat you, but to make you suffer for daring to sleep in his father's halls. One day, On Palm Sunday, a day of Christian peace, you and your fellow soldiers leave the relative safety of the castle walls to attend Mass at the nearby St. Bride's Church. The service begins, but as the priest speaks, a sound from outside chills you to the bone, the terrifying, unmistakable war cry of, "A Douglas! A Douglas!" Before you can react, the church doors are barred from the outside, and you are trapped. The Black Douglas and his small band of loyal followers are upon you. A one-sided, merciless slaughter ensues in the sacred space. But his vengeance is not yet complete. This is not just about killing you. It is about making a statement so ghastly it becomes a legend. He takes you and your dead comrades back to the castle you thought was your fortress. He leads his men to the Great Hall's cellar, where the garrison's provisions are stored. One by one, he orders the bodies of the slain English soldiers to be decapitated over the barrels of grain, their heads tossed into a corner. He then piles the headless corpses in a grotesque heap in the center of the cellar. He commands his men to break open all the barrels of wine, ale, and salted beef, mixing the precious food and drink with the blood, gore, and viscera of your men until the entire cellar becomes a horrifying, stinking morass of filth and carnage. To complete the message, he poisons the castle well with salt and the carcasses of horses before setting the entire structure ablaze, leaving behind a smoldering, desecrated ruin. This act of psychological warfare, a masterpiece of gruesome vengeance designed to make the very name of his castle terrifying to any English soldier who heard it, is known to history as the Douglas Larder. Number 13. The vengeance of the Jacquerie. Revenge is often the province of the powerful. But what happens when the object of vengeance is the entire ruling class itself? What happens when the patience of the common man, stretched thin by decades of war, plague, famine, and crushing taxation, finally snaps with the force of a natural disaster? Imagine you are a peasant in northern France in the summer of 1358. Your world is one of relentless, grinding hardship. The Black Death has ravaged your family. The 100 Years' War against England has destroyed your fields. The French nobility, who are bound by a feudal contract to protect you, have proven themselves catastrophically incompetent. Their king himself recently captured by the English at the Battle of Poitiers. Now, these same nobles demand ever higher taxes to pay their ransoms, while their own mercenary soldiers, the routiers, roam the countryside, pillaging your farm and brutalizing your family with impunity. You are seen not as a person, but as property, a beast of burden to be exploited. On May 28th, in a small village near the Oise River, a spark is lit. A group of peasants, enraged by the latest depredations of a local lord, turns on his men and murders them. The news spreads like wildfire across the countryside. Years of silent, simmering, impotent resentment explodes into a tidal wave of unimaginable violence. This was not a structured rebellion with political aims. It was a spontaneous, anarchic howl of pure class-based revenge. Thousands of peasants, armed with fire-hardened pikes, farm implements, and makeshift weapons, formed roving bands. They moved from castle to castle, their numbers swelling with each passing day as more of the downtrodden flocked to their cause. Their rage was absolute. They slaughtered any noble they could find, men, women, and children alike, often with a sadistic cruelty born of long-suppressed hatred. They burned castles and manor houses to the ground, and, most importantly, they destroyed the courtly records and legal documents that listed their debts and feudal obligations, a symbolic burning of their own servitude. The nobles, who initially dismissed the uprising with contempt, were stunned by its ferocity. This brutal, desperate, and ultimately doomed explosion of popular vengeance against an entire ruling class is known as the Jacquerie. Number 14. The St. Brice's Day Massacre. Sometimes, an act of state-sponsored revenge can be born not of strength, but of weakness, fear, and paranoia. Imagine you are a king of England, known to history by the unfortunate title of Ethelred, the unready, which did not mean unprepared, but rather ill-counseled. Your kingdom has been plagued for years by devastating, large-scale raids from Danish Viking armies. You have tried to buy peace by paying them immense sums of tribute, the Danegeld. But this policy of appeasement has only shown weakness and encouraged them to return for more. You begin to suspect the thousands of Danish settlers who live peacefully within your own kingdom, in the region known as the Danelaw. You wonder if they are a fifth column, secretly aiding their marauding countrymen and plotting your downfall. In a state of growing fear and political desperation, you decide on a final, terrible solution. On St. Brice's Day, November 13th, in the year 1002, King Ethelred issued a secret royal decree. He commanded his English subjects that on that day they were to fall upon all the Danes living within their communities and kill them, to root them out, like weeds amongst the wheat. What followed was a brutal, kingdom-wide pogrom. In towns across England, Danish settlers merchants, farmers, men, women, and children who had lived in England for years, some for generations, were dragged from their homes and slaughtered. In Oxford, the Danish community sought sanctuary inside Christ Church Cathedral, but the local populace, whipped into a frenzy, set the church on fire, burning them alive inside. Ethelred intended this to be a decisive act of political cleansing, a final, bloody answer to his Viking problem. Instead, it was a catastrophic and self-defeating miscalculation. Among the many victims of the massacre was Gunhilda, the sister of the powerful King Sweyn Forkbeard of Denmark, who had been living in England as a hostage under the king's protection. When news of his sister's murder and the slaughter of his people reached him, Sweyn's desire for tribute transformed into a cold, unquenchable thirst for total vengeance. Ethelred's act of ethnic revenge directly triggered a series of massive, punitive Danish invasions that would ultimately lead to the collapse of his kingdom and the conquest of the entire English throne by Sweyn's son, Canute the Great. This was the short-sighted, bloody, and calamitous act of vengeance known as the St. Brice's Day Massacre. Number 15. The Sacrilege of Guy de Montfort. Revenge is often about a perceived debt of honor, a desperate need to answer a wrong done to one's family name. But what if that thirst for vengeance is so all-consuming, so blinding, that it leads you to commit an act so profane it shocks the whole of Christendom? Imagine you are the son of a great and powerful English nobleman, Simon de Montfort, a man who led a rebellion against King Henry III in a fight for political reform, but who was defeated, killed, and then brutally dismembered on the battlefield by royalist forces. You have been driven into exile in Italy, your family's lands confiscated, your father's name disgraced, your heart burning with a desire to avenge not just his death, but the dishonoring of his corpse. For years you search for an opportunity. It finally comes in the city of Viterbo, Italy. In the year 1271, you learn that your cousin, Henry of Almonte, son of Richard of Cornwall, the man who led the army that killed your father, is in the city, attending church. You find him where he believes he is safest, kneeling at the high altar during Mass in the church of San Silvestro. For you, the sanctity of the location is not a deterrent. It is part of the revenge. This is the man whose family shamed your father, and you will have your vengeance in the very presence of God. As the priest elevates the host, the most sacred and mystical moment of the entire service, you and your brother draw your swords. You stride to the altar, seize your cousin by the hair, and drag him away, stabbing him to death repeatedly. The act of murdering your own kin was a terrible crime. But to do so during High Mass, to defile a consecrated space with an act of bloody family vengeance, was an unthinkable sacrilege that horrified all of Europe. It was a crime so infamous that the greatest poet of the age, Dante Alighieri, would later immortalize you in his Inferno, placing you in the seventh circle of hell, submerged alone in the Phlegethon, a river of boiling blood, guarded by centaurs. This was the sacrilegious, honor-driven revenge of Guy de Montfort. Number 16. The Humiliation of an emperor. Sometimes, revenge is not a swift, bloody act, but a slow, grinding, and deeply personal humiliation. It is a vengeance designed not just to kill an enemy's body, but to break their pride, to shatter their aura of power, and to display their submission to the entire world. Imagine you are a Byzantine emperor, the successor to Constantine and Augustus, God's chosen ruler on earth. But you have led your army to a catastrophic defeat in battle, and you have been captured by the leader of a people you consider to be nomadic barbarians. Your enemy, the Seljuk Sultan, now holds you, the anointed ruler of a 1,000-year-old Christian empire, as his personal prisoner. This was the fate of the Emperor Romanos IV, Diogenes, after the pivotal Battle of Manzikert in 1071. After his army was routed by the brilliant tactics of the Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan, Romanos was captured and brought before the victorious Sultan. According to the chronicles, Alp Arslan, a man of great stature and presence, asked the captive emperor what he would have done had their positions been reversed. Romanos, with grim honesty, replied that he would have had the Sultan flogged or executed. Alp Arslan wryly noted that his own vengeance would be different, that it would be a punishment far worse than death. What followed was not immediate violence, but a calculated and devastating ritual of degradation. The Sultan forced the emperor to kiss the ground before him, and then he placed his boot on the neck of the Byzantine emperor, a universal symbol of total subjugation, performed in front of both armies. He kept Romanos as a captive in his camp for a week, forcing the emperor to eat at the Sultan's table like a favored pet while negotiating a peace treaty and a massive ransom. While Romanos was eventually released, the news of his capture and his public subjugation had already reached Constantinople. His authority was shattered. His rivals at court, claiming he had irreparably disgraced the empire, had him deposed in his absence. When he returned, he was betrayed, captured by his own people, and cruelly blinded with a hot iron. He died, shortly after, from the infected wounds. Alp Arslan's vengeance was so complete that he didn't need to kill the emperor. His act of ritual humiliation ensured that the emperor's own people would finish the job for him. Number 17. The execution of the favorite. Vengeance can also be a public spectacle, a brutal and gruesome piece of political theater designed to satisfy the collective anger of a nation and to cleanse the realm of a perceived poison. Imagine you are the hated favorite of a weak and unpopular king. You are seen by the powerful barons and the common people alike as a corrupt and arrogant usurper who has hoarded wealth, abused your power, led the kingdom to ruin, and holds a deeply unnatural influence over the monarch. When the king is finally overthrown by his own queen and her rebel allies, their victory is not complete. It cannot be complete until you are made to pay for your sins in the most public, painful, and symbolic way imaginable. This was the fate of Hugh Despenser the Younger, the infamous favorite and possible lover of King Edward II of England. For years, his greed and ambition, along with that of his father, had alienated the entire nobility of the realm. When Edward's estranged wife, Queen Isabella, known as the She-Wolf of France, returned to England from her native land with an army in 1326, the kingdom rose up to support her and her lover, Roger Mortimer. The king and Despenser were captured, and while the king was merely deposed and later secretly murdered, a far more terrible public fate was reserved for his favorite. His execution was a carefully staged act of ritualistic political revenge. He was tried and condemned as a traitor and a sodomite. On the day of his execution, he was dressed in a black tunic, inscribed with his coat of arms reversed, a symbol of his disgrace. He was dragged through the streets of Hereford before a great, cheering crowd. First, he was hanged from a gallows 50 feet high, but cut down before he could die of strangulation, then tied to a ladder in full view of the crowd. The true horror began. A torturer stepped forward and cut off his genitals and threw them into a roaring fire as punishment for his heresy and sodomy. Then, his abdomen was sliced open, and his entrails, his heart, liver, and other vital organs were slowly pulled out and also burned before his eyes. The punishment for treason. He was, according to one account, still conscious and screaming as he watched himself being disemboweled. Finally, his body was beheaded, and his corpse was cut into 4 pieces, the quarters to be sent to the major cities of England as a grim warning to all other would-be traitors. It was the ultimate vengeance of a kingdom upon the man they blamed for all their woes. And so, our long journey through the savage heart of the medieval world comes to an end. We have walked with queens and conquerors, with knights and peasants, with emperors and exiles. We have witnessed the cold, patient artistry of Olga of Kyiv, the explosive fury of the Sicilian Vespers, the brutal state policy of William the Conqueror, and the fiery curse of the last Templar knight. We have seen that revenge in this age was not a single, simple act. It was a complex and powerful force with many faces. It could be a matter of intimate family honor, a tool of psychological warfare, a unifying cry for a popular uprising, or the gruesome public theater of political retribution. These stories, etched in blood and fire, remind us that the medieval world was often governed by a code far more raw and personal than our own. Justice was not always a matter for the courts. It was a debt to be collected, an honor to be satisfied, a story to be told for generations so that none would forget. Vengeance was a force of nature, a consuming fire capable of toppling a dynasty just as easily as it could devour a single human heart. The echoes of these brutal acts still linger in the chronicles and ruins of the age, a chilling testament to a time when the path to justice was often paved with terrible and unforgettable revenge.